Does the CMO role exist in 10 years?
Mm, Gosh, marketing hasn't really worked for us before. I hope this person is better.
It's almost like marketing has become the support function that's chasing other functions rather than leading what needs to be done and leading the voice of the customer.
I probably opened a drink for myself for achieving my MQL number. It's a tough gig.
There's been this obsession around pipeline as being the only metric and the only artifact of transition between a CMO and the CRO.
For me, brand is the pipeline of pipeline. We are investing in the education and trust of a target market of which only 5% is in market at any given time. But every investment we make in that 95% that's not in market right now increases our distance from the revenue.
We are an attribution company, or we've been doing attribution, and we're talking about all of the unattributable aspects of the CMO role. So love it.
In market customers have likely already made a brand decision. That's how that works. You're either in there or you're not. But we trust people more than institutions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of our CMO Moneyball podcast. I'm very excited to welcome Allison Snow to this episode. She's been an amazing marketing leader, and now she consults with CMOs and founders around go-to-market strategy. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you. Kinder, it's really good to see you and be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I was very excited for this episode. Since you've had an amazing career, you've done various roles I was seeing, right, in marketing, in demand generation, product marketing, sales enablement, being a CMO yourself, and now you're consulting with other CMOs and I think founders on go-to-market strategy, etc. How has the CMO and the marketing function evolved over these years? I
Yeah.
know it's a very time for CMOs nowadays, right? They're being pressured around many aspects. The role is also in question. So I would love to kind of understand how your experience has been on the evolution of the role, as well as what you see other CMOs experiencing now.
Totally. So I would start by reminding everyone if they don't recall that in 2017, Harvard Business Review published an article called Why CMOs Never Last. And just
Mm.
a funny aside, when that happened, a lot of CMOs said, I found this article because my CEO printed it and put it on my desk. Or, I somehow this was sent to me by a board member or a CEO 9 years later. And I have a feeling if those authors went back to revisit that article, they wouldn't say, we're all set. Took care of everything that we talked about in that article. And I think a few of the things that they talked about in that article is just still relevant. So I kind of bring them up. We are, as CMOs and the CMOs that I speak to and try to support, the role has difficulty in definition. So if you're hiring a CFO and you know that you want to go public, you sort of know exactly what you're looking for in a CFO, and et cetera. And I think for CMOs, it is really difficult for organizations before they bring them in to say, this is precisely what we need for our company right now. And I think it's appropriate to say, hey, CMO, I'd like to bring you in to tell me what I need my company to do right now. And I think that is an unusual pairing of C-level executive and executive team to kind of say, hey, there's still room to define this role even once somebody sits in the seat.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
say that as a very, very large umbrella to what I think is happening here. But then, the responsibilities kind of under that seat, from e-commerce to customer experience to retention to acquisition, and all of the metrics that sit under there, it's a broad remit. And
Mm.
it's a broad remit from, in so many cases, executive teams and CEOs that are kind of thinking or even saying out loud, marketing hasn't really worked for us before. I hope this person is better.
Yeah.
So, a lot of things I said there, but just a way to kick things off fairly broadly. It's a tough gig.
Yeah. I mean, we see that every day in our experience when we are working with customers or when we are talking to prospects, right? We see sometimes there's just a revolving door. I was talking to an enterprise customer, a company, and, they had about 4, 5 CMOs that had come in over the past 2 to 3 years. And it's been very tough, frankly, because there's been this pressure. Like you said, the role definition of the CMO is still seeking clarity, right? Whether the CMO role is relevant. Is there going to be a bifurcation of that role? Recently, one of our other advisors, Tom Wentworth, talked about how he's seeing a bifurcation of the role into brand and then the whole demand function going into the CRO function.
Mhm.
So it's pretty tough times if you're a CMO currently, definitely. So Also, we keep hearing this phrase, sales and marketing alignment.
Hmm.
And as soon as you hear this phrase, it almost seems like, hey, there's the onus is really on the marketing teams and the CMO to drive alignment, right? And so it's almost like marketing has become the support function that's chasing other functions rather than leading what needs to be done and leading the voice of the customer into each of these functions.
Yes.
How do you think the sales and marketing alignment problem actually surfaced, and how can it be solved?
So I think the way it surfaced was, and talk about going back to 2016, right? This is sales and marketing alignment is a term that we have been using appropriately and relevantly for a while now. Again, it's not like we solved it. So we're still talking about it, and we should be because it still exists. I think the reasons have changed. I think if we were talking in 2016 and it's still relevant now, so I'm going to mention it, there we were not necessarily aligned for the same outcomes. And so we really did in 2016. I did, so I'll just take the blame. I probably opened a drink for myself for achieving my MQL number. Okay, I did it.
Mm.
It's nothing. I didn't know necessarily that I was missing something there, all the time. So I was incented financially to
Mm.
build that number. I was incented financially on volume. I was incented financially, right, on things of that nature. And, I learned myself, not from incentives, that if I'm walking around in the hallway and I see my sales colleagues and I have a smile on my face and they don't, that's bad, right? I didn't see that on a dashboard or numbers. I saw that in the faces of my colleagues who said, "What are you guys doing? We call people and they don't know who we are. That's you. I don't care that you're in demand gen. I don't care that you're in brand or events. That's you. I'm the person who calls and builds relationships and shakes hands and closes deals. You're the person that makes sure that when I pick up a phone, people
Mm.
know who we are." Um, so I think we had to pick up on this a little before we had the organizational support to pick up on it. And so sales and
Mm.
marketing alignment became, we don't even know what you're trying to do over there in those seats in that corner of the building. We'll just
Got
do it ourselves, right? And then we saw things like, I'd say, ABM kind of try to solve this, right? And this concept of, when you tear down every other detail, can we at least go after the same accounts? Could we at least say, hey, we have a really good ICP and that's translated to a really good set of targeted accounts? And I wouldn't say that that didn't necessarily work, right? I wouldn't sit here and say ABM didn't work, but it didn't solve all of the problems, because jump to today and we still don't have it. Number one, you just mentioned a company that had 4 or 5 CMOs. How do you build a relationship with that sixth CMO if you're the salesperson on that side, right? So you also are head of revenue. You're also struggling with that turnover, in the sense that there is a non-finite aspect of the role. As a CMO, how do you come in as the sixth person, or the second or third, very commonly, but uncommonly, as you pointed out, you're the sixth. So you're already in a catch up, prove position. And your focus on alignment becomes, well, I've just got to prove. I don't have to have a great idea, although maybe people would like that. Um, what I need to do is put up deep, deep numbers, and those numbers, by the way, should be across new acquisition, should be across retention. There might be a little customer lifetime value baked in there. It
Mhm.
might be new users on a PLG motion. All that being said, the first thing you
Right.
have to do is sort of negotiate with yourself and your colleagues. What do I do in 6 months that even helps me approach an alignment conversation with some credibility? So you're just
Mm.
starting not at one, but at negative something. And I
Yeah.
think that's really difficult. I think the other piece that has interrupted the sales marketing alignment, and it's really important, is that that's not the only alignment that matters. And I think for CMOs to be as valuable as we need to be right now, that conversation has to be not just sales and marketing alignment, which, as we discussed, is already difficult, but also product, right? What are we building? Does it fulfill the brand promise, the company promise? Post sale, everything customer experience, everything account management. Any logical person knows that we don't have, a powerful acquisition engine if we don't have a powerful retention engine. Everyone who knows modern buyers would tell you we don't have an acquisition engine if we don't have a customer advocacy engine that is strong and provides us with the proof that we need. I think one, we are held accountable to align more organizations. I do think that's the role that we should play. I just don't think
Mm.
it's the cards that are dealt us when we kind of
Yeah.
sit in that seat for the first time, in a seat that someone else was perceived to having failed at.
No, absolutely. I think you made a great point, because I think it's sales and marketing alignment is definitely very important, but it's not just that. It's about how do you shape the alignment with other functions, product, even the finance organization, the customer organization, etc. Right? I think that becomes very important.
Totally.
And then one thing that we also see is that is the as a CMO, one is making spend and cost decisions on a day-to-day basis, but there is a distance from the revenue, right? So, for example, the distance from, hey, the getting the contract done, getting the cash flow in, getting the revenue in, and booking the revenue, there's a distance. Do you see that there is this there's this alignment debt? And I don't want to now call it sales and marketing alignment, but a broader alignment from a business perspective debt that CMOs have to kind of figure out how to reduce because of this distance from the revenue, right? Because if I am a CMO, or if one is a CMO, you want to shape the decisions that are taking place, right? And shape it 6 months down the line. Sales is usually making the next 1 month decision because
Yes.
they're trying to close revenue. But at the same time, you don't want to be too far away from the revenue. What's the perspective on this distance from the revenue?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, while you're making daily cost decisions, or while one is making daily spend decisions. Yeah.
Totally. Right. The things that you invest in as a CMO are long term. I don't want to say bets. That almost came out of my mouth too smoothly. Long term plans and investments. And look, for most of the time in B2B organizations, we are talking about sales elapsed sales processes and buying processes, more importantly, of 9 to 12 months. Right. Let's just say that that's universally about right. It could be six, could be longer.
Hmm.
And so what we have got to do is continue, of course, to build a pipeline. For me, brand is the pipeline of pipeline. And so we are investing in the education and trust of a target market of which only 5% is in market at any given time. So we have to make a choice, but every investment we make in that 95% that's not in market right now increases our distance from the revenue, the way that you would
Yeah.
describe it, I think very, very accurately and cleverly.
Yeah.
So the safest place to be is, in fact, let's go after in-market customers, right? We'll show some numbers right off the bat. Now, in-market customers have likely already made a brand decision. That's how that works. By the time you've done your education, you've shortlisted 1 to 3 people. You can throw yourself in a deal at that time. I'm not going to knock intent data, very powerful tool. But you've got to reckon with the fact that those folks have some brand preference. You're either in there or you're not. So the smart money for someone looking 6 or a year ahead is this 95% of the TAM that isn't really thinking about you right now, but with whom you need to establish some trust. And I think there's a real disconnect there between
Mm.
your passion for the long-term health of the business and your interest and frankly cashing your bonus check and having a job in 6 months. I mean, that's what the stakes are to me. It's that serious. So there is so much work to do for CMOs. And I think this is an overwhelming amount of work. And we have to help them with podcasts like these, with sessions like these, and say, we need better ways to think about attribution. We need
Mm.
to understand, right? If you think about how folks in large B2C organizations say, we did it, there's just this massive algorithm based calculation that is full of proxies and assumptions, and it works. It's worked forever, right? You want to buy a large banner and at Logan Airport or what have you, you'll be able to put together a story of why it worked. But it's all inclusive of, look, here's distance. We said, what did it look like 6 months before, and what did it look like when we put up the banner? That's important stuff. And I think we're not so great right now and getting better at, hey, here's how I want to be measured on this. Like, let me pitch to you before we do it. I would like to make a long term bet on our total addressable market. It looks like this. Some of it is experimental, or else I would have hard data for you. And I would love to, right? We know that that would be easier for me in this meeting, and I would leave and you would smile and I would smile, and then I'd bring you a bag of money. But if we're going to try anything that hasn't worked before, for those folks who aren't necessarily in market, it's just a difficult conversation. So to land this plane, I would tell you we need more effective methods and techniques as B2B marketers and CMOs to do the attribution work, which is not going to be dollar in and dollar out necessarily, but how do we expand these attribution techniques to be a year long, credibly? How do we say there are other outcomes that are delightful for the business? If I send you to an event and you come back with six, it doesn't really matter, fake numbers, 100 leads and 50 of them go into pipeline, all good. But what if I also tell you that I learned really, really important, leverageable things for 20 of our target accounts? Was that worth money? I think it was. But how do I convince you before 6 months later when you say that event was a bust? Huh? We got, it's 6 months later, we have 200 grand in pipeline and you spent 50 grand and we don't like those numbers for whatever reason, all of those made up. But there has to be ways for us to say, I'm going to be in charge of the value I develop and articulating why it's value. And to go back to alignment, I need you all to buy into it or I'm already failing.
Got it. No, no, you mentioned something very important among the many other things. The best CMOs and marketing teams own their own measurement framework, right? For
Mm,
too long, there's been this obsession around pipeline as being the only metric and the only artifact of transition between a CMO and the CRO. But again, to to your point, it's not just about the CMO CRO interaction. The CMO owns a larger mandate, right? So the measurement or the attribution needs to take into account a larger mandate, which is, hey, we want to target buyers who are not yet, they need to be aware of us even if they're not in market, right? We need to get the word out there, and we are making certain bets or experiments on taking those and influencing those buyers rather than just focus on generating the pipeline. While you have to kind of, there's a balance between the both. I think that's one thing that's very important.
yeah.
And that's where the alignment between, it's not just coming back to the, when we started the sales and marketing alignment, it's the alignment with the larger purpose of the organization. It's the CMO CEO alignment, CMO CEO, CMO CFO alignment that also matters, right? And the CMO customer alignment, right? Like I find a lot of times that marketing teams can bring a lot of value in terms of the voice of the customer, right? What are the real pain points and expectations and what the customers are expecting through conversations when you kind of, let's say you do like a trade show or an event or you do a dinner event, etc.,
Mhm.
which is beyond the aspect around, hey, how much pipeline did I generate and how many leads did I get out of that,
Yeah.
right? And I think articulating that is tough. And sometimes marketing teams, I think, also are struggling to figure out how to roll up their sleeves and figure out how to get into the front lines and get some of those insights because they're always distracted with stuff like, hey, how much pipeline did you generate? How does one balance getting customer insights and becoming the voice of the customer, like as the famous management guru Peter Drucker talked about, right? Marketing is everything that you do around the customer, right? How does marketing bring back that focus and prove value to the organization, not just in terms of pipeline, which is very important, and revenue, which is very important, but in the larger scope of things, how does it become the voice of customer within the organization?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of work to do to assert that you are
Mm,
that person. And
mhm,
and so I just want to, for empathy's sake, look at why CMOs aren't doing that, right? And we've covered
yeah,
it, so I won't spend a lot of time here. But we're busy. We don't understand the remit. We know we're accountable for pipeline. So I need you to imagine for the audience, walking into a room with the CEO and CFO and saying, I'd like to be accountable for customer insights. Well, you haven't
mhm,
even made your number, so can you just clear that barrier and then kind of work on that? Let's
mhm,
just say that
yeah,
you've managed through that and that's what you want to do. There's a couple of things. We all have the image in our brain of a CMO, any C-level executive, frankly, at their desk, delegating, and saying things like, build the report and then I'll review the report. And increasingly, especially in sort of mid-sized businesses, we're seeing CMOs that are just in systems, going into gong calls and doing the listening themselves.
mm,
Their teams are smaller, they're forced to do this, they're more curious, whatever the case. And yeah, I think Gong is a really good tool. And they're saying, you know what? I've got this messaging framework that maybe someone else developed and maybe I did. I haven't seen a
Mm,
win-loss report in a very long time. I actually haven't
mm,
stuck my nose into, how are people using the win-loss infrastructure that we've provided just in the CRM, right? If we do we have a culture of people saying, I'm just going to click the first drop down, or is this meaningful data? Right. So I think we're starting to ask questions like that. And I certainly think that to close the gap between our distance to the customer that we have now and make it shorter, it is a matter of getting into the systems where that data is held. It is certainly a matter of having customer conversations. You
mhm,
should be able to kind of say, um, you know, what do we love for customers to say about us, and how do we put those words in their mouths, and where do we want those words to appear when they say them? Whether it's the stage at a very specific conference with a very specific audience, or G2 crowd, we really have to understand to nail that message from the customer's mouth. We can't just kind of rely on this should organically take place because the product is awesome. We need the insights to say, what is going to move a buyer and for the products that my company sells from this is really interesting to I might be able to get some budget for this too. I will move that budget to your, you know, I will buy from you, regardless of the
mm.
fact that I determined I needed this thing and there's competitors for it. So there's, we have to kind of go through all of those pieces of the buyer journey.
Yeah,
And we can't do it without saying, what makes you depend what makes you move on a
yeah,
product like this? And ultimately, that is all customer insights. And I think the answers are there in systems, on the phone, in meetings, and really it is a function of curiosity. And you have to figure out a way to be rewarded for that work, or you will simply be penalized in your other metrics.
completely agreed. Completely agreed. I think customer insights is so important. It's both inbound, understanding the customer, what kind of ticks for the customer,
Mhm.
but also then how do you use that to shape customer preference? That will ultimately lead to pipeline and ultimately lead to
Yes.
better win rates, etc. Right? And so, kind of getting rewarded for that
You know,
has to become a very important role that the CMO kind of champions for themselves and their marketing teams. Now, talking about the role again,
yeah.
um, why do we see very few CMOs becoming CEOs,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Right, because that's one thing that I've often wondered. I see a lot of CROs becoming CEOs, a lot of product guys becoming CEOs. Not to say that there aren't any instances,
Yeah.
but what is that proportion lesser than what one would expect? Because the CMO is really understanding, and their teams are really understanding the customer aspect, the longer term value proposition of the product, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Just theses here, right? Like everybody else. I would say one, we talked earlier about how the role is perceived as a service organization. Um, That's not a powerful role, and I really hate to say this, but I think the audience needs
Mm,
to hear it. When you're in an executive room, head of product, head of finance, CEO, all of these pieces, and then you have 2 roles, CMO and CHRO, that are truly considered support functions almost universally. I would say both of
mm,
those roles, infrequently show up as the CEO, but as you say, one of those roles is super close to the customer and one doesn't need to be. So what is it distinctly about the CMO role? I think it
mhm,
is that no matter how ideal we are coming into a role, once you are molded into a service organization, once you are penalized for not making certain metrics that are pipeline and direct attribution and things that are very close and safe and close to pipeline, that you haven't necessarily sort of uncleverly moved into the customer experience piece, without setting expectations that this is a value and demonstrating how, I think you're counted out of a lot of those conversations that say, can you take over what is essentially managing the investment in the business, right? With investors, whether public or private, a big part of the CMO role. Are you able to make the extremely difficult decisions that are associated with the CEO role, based on your experience that we've observed as a CMO and the biases with which we observe them?
mm.
So I think there's a better answer out here than the one that I have, and it's worth pursuing. But I do think we are, again, just initially harmed by the expectations and bias according to the role.
Yeah, I think kind of raising oneself above this service function mindset that unfortunately marketing is put under
Hmm.
is one of the biggest challenges for marketing teams and for CMOs, right? How to kind of raise yourself above from that. We have to kind of, as marketers, we have to kind of own that, right? Because and fight for it essentially.
Totally.
Unfortunately, that is what's happening currently. Also, on because I feel that if you think about a CEO or a board member, they really love evangelists,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I think some CMOs are trying to turn themselves into becoming the evangelists for the organizations. And I think that's probably now the minimum requirement, right? If you have to earn the respect of the executive team and the board, right? If you become a great evangelist, right, that kind of
Yeah.
takes you out of the service function, the service support function category, right? Because now you have to kind of you're the brand ambassador, right? So
100%.
how important is it, and what does that mean to who can become the CMO and who can't become the CMO? Because you have to do that job irrespective of whether you're an introvert, you're an extrovert, etc.
Such a good question. I think that the concept of does a company need an evangelist right now is just an auto yes, right? So someone's got to do that. And if you happen to be a CMO that's also kind of struggling with, gosh, I've got 12 metrics from which I'm judged. No matter the work I do, my work doesn't always show up here. It's a pretty strong signal if I walk into these meetings and that I am the voice of this company, that in fact the level of trust that people have in me, and my evangelism for this business is as high as the corporate entity itself. I'm looking pretty good there. I'm pretty excited. I think that there are CMOs that do this really well. In smaller businesses, I think the CEOs do this really well. And what it comes down to is we now trust, and there's a lot of background for this that we don't have to go into today, but we trust people more than
That is true. Yeah.
that's just where we are, and again, of course, you can imagine how we get on past that. But here we are, and so as individuals, if we're lending our credibility and our careers to the voice of this company, it's a very, very important signal. There's a couple of things here. When you really believe in what the product and company does, I think evangelism is quite natural, right? I think this works particularly well in an example like Latany Conant in Sixth Sense. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Not just that Latany is brilliant and wonderful and articulate, all that's important, but Latany is also a marketer that sells to marketers. That's maybe not fair that I'm using her name, but it's all positive, so I think it is. She is credible for the people who decide what software to use for what their job to be done is, and that's huge. I imagine in other organizations that has to be an engineer.
Got it. Very interesting. So CMOs definitely, marketing teams and CMOs can gain more credibility if they become the evangelists. Obviously, you need to believe in the product,
Yeah.
and you also need to match the buyer's persona, right? And in that case, that becomes a perfect match in a sense, because now you believe in the product, you put yourself out there as an evangelist, but you also gain credibility because you match the persona. In fact, we did one of these key things when we were starting our go to market. We had someone, Alex, who heads our GTM, uh, who came from a demand generation and a marketing background, right? Then that aspect really helped us break into customers and prospects because we were selling into marketing teams and demand generation teams and CMOs. And when they have someone who has who's been in their shoes
Yes.
and then can kind of have a conversation with them, that makes a huge degree of difference, right? So definitely, if you want to be a CMO in a developer tool, then you
Yeah.
probably come from a development background,
I
right?
think
But you can
that's
still be a CMO from a development background,
Yes,
right?
and I think Defender,
Uh,
I actually just coached someone through this because
yeah.
they're being recruited for an AI company as a CMO, and they had this concern. And I think the way to deal with that is you do have to be able to build an evangelist, right? You become the background person, but you're going to need to understand what are the
Hmm.
channels where these folks live.
Yeah.
What are the parts about what you're building that you should make public? Like you
Hmm.
should become the first level consultant to the person that you want to position as an evangelist. You don't get out of it. You don't have to not be the CMO, but you do have to say, we need a voice out there. I need to get someone ready to be welcome
Hmm.
on very large stages where my buyers go. Maybe it can't be my face, which for some people that would be excellent, and for some people that wouldn't be so excellent. But your role is certainly to build those profiles A lot of times it's the profile of a founder, right? Part of your role is to make a celebrity out of that person. And so if you can't be the person, I don't think it disqualifies you from the CMO roles, but I do think it adds another, by the way, unattributable task for you as a CMO, which is build the folks that rally the buyers.
That's amazing. We are an attribution company, or we've been doing attribution,
Yeah.
and we're talking about all of the unattributable aspects of the CMO role. So I love it. Uh, so now, since you spent so many years, and with which you talk about the marketing function, the CMO role, how it needs to lead, own the customer. Um, does the CMO role exist in 10 years?
Mm, gosh. Well, I wouldn't be the first person to say this, but
Mhm.
I think that a role exists, and I don't know what it's called. And I think chief marketing officer, by the way, would nail it. It's kind of an aside, but I once had a conversation with someone, and they said, what would be a great name for a self driving car? It's like automobile. Too bad it's taken. Automobile would be an amazing name. So even though it's taken, chief marketing officer might be a great name for the role that I believe we'll need in 10 years. 10 years is a kind of long time span to look at now, but let's do it as an exercise. I do
Sure.
think it's a customer insights role. I do think it's the person who says, hey, I've got some oversight and responsibility and accountability at the go to market level of this organization. I'm not quite the CEO. There are things the CEO does not does that I don't do that that person does. But here I am. I will understand and ensure, and I'll be the interlock among all of the go-to-market teams, plus the true support teams like finance and HR. Right? I will hold accountability for the fact that we have the right talent for the go-to-market motion that we're employing. I will ensure we have the talent for the ICP that we're exploring. I'll make sure there's an evangelist function. I'll make sure that that product never goes to whatever marketing is called and says, "We built this thing. Here it is on the product side. Here it is for you, marketing. Can you go ahead and put it over the wall?" There will be things like, whatever is the problem in sales marketing alignment in your organization, if people are being measured on different metrics, there will be a role for a person who's got, very special um, permission from the executive team, a high level of trust to say there's really no room I can't walk into and say this appears broke, this appears misaligned, this appears unoptimized. This doesn't sound like what they're doing in product. I don't like this at all. I don't like how this is kind of discordant to me. So let's talk about it. That's a role. I mean, I think people should have it now. And I think CMOs can really and I really lobby and champion this notion that CMOs can put themselves in that role. Um, what's in our way right now. We're not necessarily welcome there, right? There's no head of product that's like, hey, marketing, can you come audit what we're doing from a roadmap perspective? Um, that doesn't fly. It just doesn't. You and I both know it doesn't. But someone who says, "Look, I'm deeply briefed on this market. I'm deeply briefed on our customers. I understand why they retain. I understand why they churn. I understand the objections we get in a sales process. I get it. Um, I need to make sure that all the engines that we run, and if functions still exist, and the various functions just run in the same direction all the time." And
No, very wonderfully put, because I think what you're saying is, even if the CMO title doesn't exist, you need someone to do these aspects, right?
yeah,
Which additionally a CMO should be doing, or the CMO function should have been given the power and the empowerment to do.
yeah,
But these gap roles that are very integration roles, right? That are essentially, you know, bringing out what is the vision, mission, purpose of the organization into the front line, into the product, into the customer organization, into the sales organization. Having a point of view where things might be broken or not broken and how to enhance is a very, very important function that today either a founder is doing it or the CEO is doing it, but it's being done partially. As you scale, you need that dedicated role within the organization. And hopefully, even if the CMO title or the CMO role doesn't exist, that kind of transitions to that kind of role,
yeah.
right? Although I think that the CMO role, marketing will still be required, because that is the only function of an organization that influences the customer, shapes the preferences of the customer. That's very, very important. Great. Thank you so much, Allison. Before letting you go, I had one last question.
Sure.
Since we're an AI company and we are talking a lot about AI agents and context, right? Even for attribution, you need full funnel context about what's happening in the business, all of the interactions with the customer, etc. So, had there been a moment for you where you felt, hey, AI has changed marketing forever?
I mean, I maybe daily. I truly, I'm in these tools constantly, and truly, honestly, I'm saying that word too much, on an ongoing a basis, just amazed and grateful about the time that I'm saving. So ultimately, first of all, I think attribution is ripe for what AI can help us do. Like, what a previously unsolvable problem, because connecting those data points is really, really an issue. So I'm excited about the possibilities there. For me, I use it, to get ready for client meetings in ways that just, gosh, I'm a better consultant because of it. I'm a
Got it.
better consultant with a full-time thought partner that just kind of helps me think through, I have a half-baked hypothesis here. Let's talk
Mm.
about it, right? And we kind of get that, talk about these moments a lot, the ABM moment, the digital marketing moment, and the
Mhm.
AI moments. People talk about the AI moment in marketing, and I'm never inclined to talk about it without saying, it doesn't matter if you're an accountant or a radiologist or if you run a local community center, this is changing your life every day. And so it's for me, as you can see, I'm struggling. I don't have the words for it.
Got it. Got it. Perfect. With that note,
So,
AI is here and it
yeah,
is impacting everyone every day as we speak. And with that note, thank you so much, Allison. We'd love to have you back again in some time. Thank you.
absolutely. Be well.
Thanks.